Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another edition of my Heavy Thoughts series. This is where I take a moment to share with you what's been on my mind. And what's been on my mind is, are we unknowingly trapped in our own musical bubbles? And what got me thinking about this was I was in a local record store, and I was buying, I like obscure heavy 70s stuff. And so I was talking to the guy at the store buying some records, and he was suggesting and recommending some things. And I mentioned a band, and I said, man, I hope they reissue this album. I think that it would sell a lot. And he goes, man, you got to realize that, he goes, the people that are into this, like me and you, this guy's with, the guy that owns the store is really into this kind of stuff. He goes, we think this stuff is huge because we love it. We talk about it. We talk about it with our friends. We watch YouTube videos on it and stuff like that. But he goes, you got to realize that this stuff is a tiny, tiny sliver of the people who are buying records or that are into music. And it got me thinking about, we all sort of exist in a world where, we watch YouTube videos, we read articles, we're in Facebook groups and stuff like that with the things that we're interested in. And sometimes you can think that something is bigger than it really is, or you may not be able to see things clearly because you're on the inside of it. I'm getting ready to make a video on my experiences in the goth world. I'm not going to get too into it. I'll save it for the video. But there's this podcast that I listen to, a goth talk podcast, if you will, and they sometimes reference metal. And I think to myself, like, what are they talking about? Like, they have this view, because their view of it is from the outside. It's like your own voice. I tell people that when I first started making YouTube videos, I was like, oh my God, is that what I sound like when I talk? Is that what I look like? For real? I didn't realize I moved my hands that much. You realize all these things about yourself because you're hearing your voice from a different angle than other people. You're hearing things from a different angle. Well, we tend to hear things from a different angle too, from a world that we live in, from our world of Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and stuff like that. And so sometimes it's hard for us to see outside of that. Another thing that got me thinking about this was I just recorded, I don't think it's up when this video comes out, but this Maiden A to Z podcast, and I love those guys. It's an amazing podcast. I'll try to remember to link it in the description. And we were talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here we go again with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Did a video on that. To summarize, I could care less about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And they said something about Iron Maiden. Do you think Iron Maiden would get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And I said, I mean, who knows at this point? But I said, you got to realize, or maybe they said, we were talking about Iron Maiden and Metallica, and I forget what the context was. And I said, you got to realize that Metallica is on a different, and I'm speaking from the US, that they're in a different place than Iron Maiden is. Metallica can play a football stadium or a soccer stadium anywhere in the world whenever they want to for as many nights as they want to. Iron Maiden, when they play in the US, they play hockey arenas. Still very impressive, but they're not quite on the level of Metallica. Metallica, you see them on the talk shows when 72 Seasons came out, the late night talk shows, and everybody's sort of talking about it. Iron Maiden's not quite at that level, at least here in the States. I know over in Europe and in South America, Iron Maiden can play in soccer stadiums, multi-nights in a row. But when you're in these worlds, you sort of think like Iron Maiden is the biggest band in the world because we all talk about it. We, YouTube videos on it. Our friends talk about it. The Facebook, social media, we're talking about it. And it just seems like everybody, Iron Maiden puts out a new album and everybody in the world is talking about it. Well, no, everybody in the world isn't talking about it. Just a very sort of small sliver. It's just that everybody within our bubble is talking about it, so thus it seems like it is the biggest thing. And there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, everybody. I'm a huge hockey fan, so I sometimes talk to people and I have to remind myself that there's some people that have never watched a hockey game in their life, that don't know anything about hockey, that don't care about hockey, that don't want to know anything about hockey, and that's hard for me to understand because I'm totally into it. I have a lot of friends that are into it. My son's into it. You know what I mean? It's like a big part of my world, but for some other people, it totally doesn't doesn't exist at all. It's like cricket or something. I know nothing about cricket, but there's people out there, I'm sure, where their world revolves around cricket. And what's funny too is like sometimes when I read comments from people in some of my videos or in other people's videos, and one particular thing that jumps out at me is, all right, now if I said to you, any business, maybe if you have your own business, or take any business, take a restaurant, take a movie theater, any business. And if I told you that in the last 20 years, their sales have declined by 95%, would you consider that successful? No, no one would consider that successful. CDs have fallen from their peak to now. Sales have dropped 95%. Yet I made a video a long time ago about why CDs will not have a comeback. And I put two videos out on the same day. One of them was why CDs will not have a comeback, and the other one was why CDs will have a comeback. Nobody saw, I'm exaggerating, but very few people saw the why they will have a comeback one. Everybody gravitates towards the negative one. That's a topic for another video, why negative topics seem to attract us. And I can't tell you how many personal messages I got, or people leaving comments where they said, you're an idiot, you have no idea what you're talking about. Me and my friends still buy CDs. CDs haven't gone anywhere. They're just as popular as ever. No, they're not. And there's proof of it. Any business model, if you're down 95%, no one would consider that to be a success. Now, again, this is an example of musical bubbles. In our world, physical media is, oh man, it's booming. Everybody's doing it because we go to record stores and we still buy records and CDs and stuff like that. But there's a lot of people out there that haven't paid a dime for music in ages, that never step foot in these places. And it's like the CD thing. I get all these comments. You have no idea what you're talking about. CDs are just as popular as ever. And maybe where you are, maybe it's because there's a store right down the street that still has a lot of CDs. Maybe it's, I can't remember what the context is. I think it was, Pete Pardo had, from Sea of Tranquility, I think it was on Facebook, he had commented on something about, maybe it was the Metallica album, how he couldn't find it at Walmart or something like that. He was looking for something. And I said, the last time I was at Walmart, I counted, and there was a little less than 150 CDs. I was able to count the number of CDs that they had at Walmart. I have more CDs like underneath the seats of my car than Walmart does at this point, But again, it's because we're sort of in these musical bubbles. We can't see outside of it. We can't understand. This is another thing that happens too, is we can't understand how people don't like a particular band or album, or how somebody could like a particular band or album. And I always try to be, I can look at things and say, hey, I don't like this, but I understand why other people like this. I mean, the Black Album by Metallica, this is a perfect example. That album sits in that very rare category, that diamond, like it's sold something like 17 million copies. I mean, it is in a very small group of records that have sold. That's just in the US too. That album has sold so many copies, right? So when I hear people say to me, oh, they blew it with the Black Album, that was a career disaster. No, it wasn't. Again, go back to the business model. If your business exploded by, 700%, no one would consider that to be a failure. And if you had a business, you have a food truck and you only sell hamburgers, and then you decide to start selling hot dogs and your business goes through the roof by 700, 800%, you're going to say, man, that was a smart business move. Well, with Metallica, how can you say that wasn't, you may not like it, you may have wished they stuck with what they did, but you can't argue with the numbers that album was very successful, because again, it sits in this category. There's only like 20 or 30 records that sit in this, that have sold that many copies. in the US. So it's kind of funny, it's kind of interesting. I catch myself doing it all the time where somebody will say something and I'm like, how can you not like this, or how can you not know this album, or how can you be an Iron Maiden fan and not like the Paul Di'Anno era? How can but again, there's also people that will come back at me. How come when I criticized the latest Iron Maiden albums, if I do like those records, but when I criticize them for songs being too long and stuff like that, people just come at me just like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're completely wrong, you know, blah 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 blah. And again, it's everybody loves it, you're the only person that doesn't like this. No, that's not true. You know, it's not a hot take that a lot of the Iron Maiden, some of Iron Maiden needs to edit some of their songs better. Now, I'm not the only one that feels like that. I know that. But again, it's when you're trapped, we get trapped in our own musical bubbles. It's hard for us to see clearly. It's hard for us to see beyond the things that we like, or to see outside of the sort of the musical world that we live in. Because like, I'm guessing everybody out there is very similar to me. Music is a huge part of my life. It's a lot of the videos I watch on YouTube. I listen to it a lot. I read books about it. I have friends that's our connection, is music and everything. So it's a big part of my world, and sometimes it's interesting to step outside of it, or to force myself to step outside of it and try to see things in a different way and sort of break outside of my musical bubble, if you will. Okay, there you go. Heavy thoughts. Are we sort of, what happens when we get stuck inside our own musical bubbles? Let me know if what you guys think of that. Do you find yourself sometimes like that too, where you feel like you're so inside something that you can't see it from a different perspective? You can't see it from the outside, and maybe you are able to do that. Have you ever sort of stepped outside and looked at some of the things that you like in music and stuff like that, and looked at it maybe a little bit more objectively, or been able to see how someone else who maybe has a different view or sees it differently than you? Have you been able to sort of cross over and understand where they're coming from with their opinions? Okay, let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.